Thomas Whitaker had everything money could buy: penthouse views, designer suits, and a carefully crafted life of privilege that kept him safely distant from messy human emotions. But when he impulsively invited his humble black assistant to a charity ball, he had no idea he was about to shatter every assumption about love, class, and what it truly means to risk it all. One evening of quiet humiliation and unexpected grace would force this emotionally guarded millionaire to choose between the gilded cage he'd inherited and a love that demanded he become the man he'd never dared to be. What happened next would either destroy his carefully constructed world or teach him that sometimes the greatest fortune isn't what you inherit, it's what you're brave enough to fight for. The night that changed everything started with a simple question, but it would end with a choice that would define the rest of his life. If you're ready to witness how love can transform even the most privileged heart, subscribe and tell me what city you're watching from. Because this story of courage, vulnerability, and second chances is about to begin. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Thomas Whitaker's penthouse office, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor. He sat behind his massive oak desk, scrolling through emails with the mechanical precision of someone who had been awake since 5 a.m. The city sprawled below him like a toy model, all glass and steel reaching toward the sky. Thomas paused at an email marked urgent in red letters: the annual Children's Hope Foundation charity ball. Tonight, he'd forgotten again. Mr. Whitaker, Evelyn's voice carried across the office, warm and professional. She stood in the doorway holding a steaming cup of coffee and a small stack of papers. Your morning schedule is ready. Thomas looked up, grateful for the interruption. Evelyn Brooks had been his assistant for 2 years, and she had a way of making even the most stressful mornings feel manageable. She was 27, with kind eyes and a smile that seemed to reach everyone in the room except herself. Today, she wore a simple navy dress that somehow looked more elegant than the designer suits his previous assistants had favored. Thank you. He accepted the coffee, noting how she'd remembered he preferred it black on Mondays. What's first? Conference call with the Seattle team at 9. Lunch with your accountant at 12:30, and she hesitated, glancing at her notes. The charity ball tonight. You haven't RSVP'd yet. Thomas felt his shoulders tense. Right? The ball. Evelyn studied his face with the careful attention she'd learned to use when he was avoiding something. Would you like me to send your regrets? I could say you're traveling. No. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. I should go. It's for the children's hospital, and Mother will never forgive me if I skip another one. Of course. Evelyn made a note on her tablet. Should I arrange for your usual car service? Thomas nodded, already dreading the evening. These events were always the same. The same faces, the same conversations about money and status, the same polite questions about when he'd finally settle down. At 30, he was considered prime bachelor material, which made every social gathering feel like a hunting expedition. His phone buzzed. Margaret Whitaker's name appeared on the screen. Thomas, darling. His mother's voice filled the office through the speaker. Please tell me you're planning to attend tonight. Good morning, Mother. Yes, I'll be there. Wonderful. And you're bringing someone, I hope. It would be so nice to see you with a proper companion for once. Thomas glanced at Evelyn, who was pretending to organize papers while clearly listening. We'll see. Thomas, you can't keep showing up to these things alone. People talk. Let them talk. It reflects poorly on the family. You're 30 years old. It's time you started thinking seriously about your future. The line went quiet for a moment. Thomas could practically hear his mother's disappointment through the phone. I'll figure something out, he said finally. See that you do. 7 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. The call ended, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the office. Evelyn continued arranging papers that didn't need arranging. She means well, Thomas said, though he wasn't sure why he felt the need to explain. Of course she does. Evelyn's voice was neutral, professional. Should I call one of your usual companions? Miss Hamilton seemed to enjoy the museum gala last month. Thomas thought about Sarah Hamilton, blonde, poised, from the right family. She would be perfect for tonight. She knew how to navigate these events, how to make the right conversation with the right people. She would smile at all the appropriate moments and never make anyone uncomfortable. The idea of spending the evening with Sarah felt exhausting. "Actually," Thomas said, surprising himself, "I was wondering if you might be interested in attending with me." Evelyn looked up from her papers, her eyes wide. "I'm sorry?" "As a professional courtesy, of course. You know my schedule better than anyone, and you're excellent with people. It would be helpful to have someone there who actually understands my work." Evelyn set down her papers slowly. "Mr. Whitaker, I don't think that would be appropriate." "Why not?" Thomas found himself leaning forward, suddenly invested in convincing her. "It's a charity event, not a personal engagement. You'd be representing the company." "I'd be representing you," Evelyn corrected gently. "There's a difference. You attend business dinners with me all the time. This is different, and you know it." Thomas felt a flush of embarrassment. Of course it was different, but something about the idea of attending with Evelyn felt right in a way he couldn't explain. She would see through the pretense, understand the people behind their polite masks. She would make the evening bearable. "Think about it," he said. "It would really help me out. And it's an important cause." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "What would you expect from me?" "Just be yourself. Make conversation. Maybe help me avoid the worst of my mother's matchmaking attempts." A small smile crossed Evelyn's face. "She does seem determined." "You have no idea." Evelyn looked down at her hands, considering. "It would just be for the evening? Professional?" "Absolutely." "And you'd introduce me as your assistant?" "If that's what you prefer." She was quiet again, and Thomas found himself holding his breath. Why did her answer matter so much? "All right," she said finally. "I'll go with you." Thomas felt a wave of relief that seemed entirely out of proportion to the situation. "Thank you. It starts at 7. I'll pick you up at 6:30. "Actually, I'd prefer to meet you there. It would be more professional." "Of course. Whatever makes you comfortable." Evelyn gathered her papers and headed for the door. "I should let you prepare for your 9 o'clock call." "Evelyn?" She turned back. "Thank you, really." She nodded and left him alone with his coffee and the strange feeling that he'd just changed something important without meaning to. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls. Thomas found himself distracted, thinking about the evening ahead. Every time he tried to focus on quarterly reports or budget projections, his mind wandered to Evelyn. He wondered what she would wear, how she would handle his mother's inevitable questions, whether she would enjoy herself or just endure it for his sake. By 5 o'clock, the office had emptied except for the cleaning crew. Thomas stood at his window, watching the city prepare for another night. Lights began to twinkle in office buildings across downtown, each one representing someone heading home to their real life. He thought about his own apartment, tasteful, expensive, and utterly empty. Most evenings he ordered dinner from whatever restaurant struck his fancy and ate alone while reviewing documents or watching the news. It was a comfortable life, a successful life, but lately it felt hollow in ways he didn't want to examine too closely. His phone buzzed with a text from Julian Moore, his oldest friend. "Looking forward to tonight. Haven't seen you at one of these things in months. Bringing anyone special?" Thomas typed back, "My assistant is coming with me. Professional arrangement." "The pretty one? Interesting choice." Thomas stared at the message, unsure how to respond. Julian had met Evelyn a few times during business lunches. He'd always been polite but distant, the way he was with anyone he considered beneath his notice. "It's not what you think," Thomas typed. "If you say so, see you tonight." Thomas put his phone away, feeling uneasy. Julian's tone suggested he found the idea amusing, which bothered Thomas more than it should have. But why? It was exactly what he'd told Evelyn, a professional arrangement, nothing more. So why did it feel like so much more than that? He left the office at 6, giving himself time to go home and change. His apartment felt especially quiet as he selected a black tuxedo and adjusted his tie. He'd worn this same outfit to dozens of similar events, but tonight it felt different. Tonight, he cared what he looked like. At 6:45, Thomas stood outside the Grandview Hotel, watching guests arrive in a parade of expensive cars and designer dresses. The charity ball was one of the city's major social events, drawing politicians, business leaders, and society families from across the region. Everyone who attended knew exactly where they fit in the complicated hierarchy of wealth and influence. He checked his phone. No messages from Evelyn. At 7:15, he started to worry. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized this was a mistake and decided to stay home. He wouldn't blame her. "Thomas." He turned to see his mother approaching in a shimmering gold gown, her silver hair swept into an elegant updo. Margaret Whittaker looked every inch the society matron she'd been for the past 30 years. "Mother, you look lovely." "Thank you, darling. Where is your mysterious companion? I'm dying to meet her." Before Thomas could answer, he spotted Evelyn walking up the hotel steps. His breath caught in his throat. She wore a simple black dress that somehow managed to be both modest and stunning. Her hair was pulled back in a soft updo that highlighted the graceful line of her neck. She moved with quiet confidence, ignoring the curious glances from other guests. "There she is," Thomas said, surprised by the pride in his own voice. Margaret followed his gaze, and he saw her expression shift slightly. It was subtle, a small tightening around her eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of her posture. His mother was far too polite to show open disapproval, but Thomas knew her well enough to read the signs. "I see," Margaret said quietly. Evelyn reached them and smiled warmly. "Mrs. Whittaker, it's so nice to see you again." "Miss Brooks." Margaret's voice was perfectly cordial, perfectly controlled. "How lovely that you could join us tonight. Thank you for welcoming me. This is quite an event." "Yes, we do try to make it special. The Children's Hospital depends on our support." Thomas watched the exchange, noting the careful politeness on both sides. His mother was being gracious, but there was something calculated about it. Evelyn seemed to sense it too, though she showed no sign of discomfort. "Shall we go in?" Thomas offered Evelyn his arm. The ballroom was elegant and understated, decorated with white flowers and soft lighting that made everything look like a dream. Round tables surrounded a small dance floor, and a string quartet played gentle melodies from a corner stage. Waiters moved through the crowd with trays of champagne and appetizers. Thomas guided Evelyn through the crowd, introducing her to various acquaintances. She was gracious with everyone, asking thoughtful questions and listening with genuine interest. People responded to her warmth, and Thomas found himself seeing familiar faces in a new light. "Thomas, there you are." Julian appeared beside them, resplendent in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. "And this must be the famous Miss Brooks." "Hello, Mr. Moore." Evelyn extended her hand politely. "Please call me Julian. Thomas has told me so much about you." Thomas hadn't told Julian anything about Evelyn beyond the basic facts of her employment, but he didn't correct him. "How are you enjoying the evening so far?" Julian continued. "It's wonderful. The cause is so important." "Yes, the Children's Hospital. Very worthy. Though I have to say, Thomas, you've certainly broken with tradition tonight." There was something in Julian's tone that made Thomas feel defensive, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. "How so?" Evelyn asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Oh, you know how these events work. Everyone brings the same type of companion, usually someone from the same social circle. It's refreshing to see Thomas branch out." The words were complimentary on the surface, but Thomas could hear the underlying message. "You don't belong here. This isn't your world." "Evelyn brings a fresh perspective," Thomas said firmly. "I'm sure she does." Julian smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Well, I should find my table. Enjoy your evening." As Julian walked away, Thomas felt a knot forming in his stomach. He glanced at Evelyn, trying to gauge her reaction. "He seems nice," she said diplomatically. "He's an old friend." "I can tell." Before Thomas could explain further, Clara Hayes materialized beside them. Clara was everything his mother hoped he would eventually marry: beautiful, well-connected, and utterly conventional. "Thomas, how wonderful to see you." Clara air-kissed his cheeks before turning to Evelyn with polite curiosity. "And you must be Thomas's date." "I'm Evelyn Brooks, Mr. Whittaker's assistant." "Oh." Clara's smile faltered slightly. "How modern of you, Thomas." Thomas felt the knot in his stomach tighten. "Evelyn kindly agreed to accompany me tonight. She's excellent company." "I'm sure she is." Clara's voice was sweet as honey, but there was steel underneath. "And what a lovely dress, very appropriate." The word appropriate hung in the air like a small insult. Thomas saw Evelyn's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "Thank you," Evelyn said simply. "Clara, you look lovely as always," Thomas said, trying to redirect the conversation. "Why, thank you. I was hoping we might have a dance later for old time's sake." "Perhaps," Thomas said noncommittally. Clara smiled and moved away, leaving an awkward silence. In her wake, "I should powder my nose," Evelyn said quietly. "Of course. I'll be right here." Thomas watched her walk away, noting the straight line of her shoulders, the careful control in her steps. He felt a surge of anger at Clara's subtle rudeness, followed by shame at his own failure to address it directly. He was still standing there when his mother appeared beside him. "She seems like a lovely girl," Margaret said carefully. "She is." "Thomas, darling, I hope you know what you're doing." "What do you mean?" Margaret looked around the ballroom, taking in the glittering crowd of society's finest. "This world can be challenging for people who weren't born into it. I wouldn't want anyone to be hurt unnecessarily." "Mother, Evelyn is perfectly capable of handling herself." "Of course she is. I'm just thinking of you, darling, and of her. Sometimes the kindest thing is to avoid situations that might be uncomfortable for everyone involved." Thomas felt a flash of irritation. "Since when do you worry about my assistant's comfort?" "Since you started looking at her the way you're looking at her now." The words hit him like a physical blow. Had he been that obvious? "I don't know what you think you see, Thomas." His mother's voice was gentle but firm. "I've known you your entire life. I can see when something matters to you. I'm just asking you to be careful. For both your sakes." Before Thomas could respond, Evelyn returned from the ladies' room. Her composure was perfect, but he could see something had changed in her eyes. "Everything all right?" he asked. "Of course." Her smile was bright and professional. "Shall we find our table?" Dinner was a carefully orchestrated dance of polite conversation and meaningful glances. Thomas found himself watching Evelyn navigate the social currents with growing admiration. She spoke intelligently about the charity's work, asked thoughtful questions about other guests' businesses, and managed to make even the most pompous dinner companion feel heard and valued. Mrs. Delaney, an elderly volunteer with the Children's Hospital, seemed particularly taken with Evelyn. The two women talked animatedly about the hospital's programs, and Thomas could see genuine warmth building between them. "What a delightful young woman," Mrs. Delaney told Thomas during dessert. "You're very fortunate." "Yes," Thomas said, surprising himself with the fervor in his voice. "I am." As the evening wound down, couples began moving to the dance floor. Thomas watched other guests glide across the polished marble, lost in their own private worlds of music and movement. "Would you like to dance?" he asked Evelyn. She hesitated. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate." "It's just a dance." "Is it?" The question caught him off guard. He looked into her eyes and saw something that made his heart race, uncertainty, hope, and something that might have been longing. "I don't know," he admitted. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of unspoken possibilities hanging between them. "I think we should go," Evelyn said finally. "Of course. I'll call the car." The ride home was quiet, filled with the kind of silence that said everything and nothing. Thomas kept stealing glances at Evelyn's profile, noting the way the city lights played across her face as they drove through the empty streets. "I'm sorry about tonight," he said finally. "Why?" "Some people were less than welcoming." Evelyn turned to look at him. "Did you think they would be?" The question was direct, honest, and completely fair. Thomas felt heat rise in his face. "I hoped they would be better than they were. But you knew they might not be." "Yes?" She nodded slowly. "At least you're honest about it." "Evelyn, it's all right, Mr. Whitaker. I knew what I was walking into." The formal use of his name felt like a door closing between them. When they reached Evelyn's apartment building, Thomas started to get out of the car. "That's not necessary," she said. "I can manage." "I know you can, but I'd like to walk you to your door." They rode the elevator to her floor in silence. At her apartment door, Evelyn turned to face him. "Thank you for including me tonight. It was educational." "Evelyn, I should let you get home. I know you have an early morning." She was being kind, professional, giving him an easy out. But standing there in the dim hallway light, looking at her face, Thomas realized he didn't want an easy out. "I had a good time tonight," he said. "Really, better than I've had at one of these events in years. Even with all the awkwardness? Especially with all the awkwardness, you handled it with more grace than anyone had a right to expect." A small smile crossed her face. "My grandmother always said dignity is something you carry with you, not something other people can give or take away." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman." She was. They stood there for another moment, neither quite ready to end the evening. "Good night, Mr. Whitaker." "Good night, Evelyn." He waited until he heard the sound of her door closing and the lock clicking into place before returning to the elevator. During the ride back to the lobby, Thomas found himself replaying the evening's events. Julian's subtle condescension, Clara's polite cruelty, his mother's careful warnings, the way Evelyn had held her head high through it all, never once losing her composure or her kindness. By the time he reached his own apartment, Thomas had come to an uncomfortable realization. The evening had meant something to him, something more than professional courtesy or social convenience. Somewhere between watching Evelyn charm Mrs. Delaney and seeing her maintain her dignity in the face of casual dismissal, he had started to care about her in a way that had nothing to do with work. The thought should have worried him. Instead, as he loosened his tie and looked out at the city lights, Thomas found himself wondering what it might be like to attend another event with Evelyn. Not as his assistant, but as someone he genuinely wanted to be with. The idea was both thrilling and terrifying, and as he finally headed to bed, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them tonight. Whether that something would bring them closer together or drive them apart remained to be seen. The next morning arrived gray and subdued, with clouds hanging low over the city like a heavy blanket. Thomas sat at his desk earlier than usual, staring at the same email he'd been trying to read for the past 10 minutes. The words blurred together as his mind kept drifting back to the previous evening. He could still see Evelyn's face in the car, composed, gracious, but with something guarded in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The way she'd called him Mr. Whitaker at the end of the night had felt like a step backward, a careful return to professional distance. The office door opened, and Evelyn entered with her usual quiet efficiency. She wore a cream-colored blouse and navy skirt, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Everything about her appearance was perfectly professional, perfectly appropriate. "Good morning, Mr. Whitaker." Her voice was warm but formal. "I've prepared your schedule for today. The marketing team meeting has been moved to 10:30, and your lunch with the Patterson Group is confirmed." "Thank you." Thomas accepted the folder she handed him, noting how she was careful not to let their fingers touch. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Fine, thank you. Is there anything specific you need me to prepare for the marketing meeting?" She was being polite, efficient, and completely distant. Thomas felt a stab of disappointment that surprised him with its intensity. "No, I think we're all set." He paused, searching for something to say that might bridge the gap between them. "Did you sleep well?" "Yes, thank you." The conversation felt stilted, forced. They'd worked together for 2 years with easy, natural interaction. Now they sounded like strangers making small talk. "Evelyn, about last night, if you'll excuse me, I need to make some calls before your first meeting." She was already moving toward the door, her escape so smooth it almost didn't seem like an escape at all. "Of course." Thomas watched her leave, feeling the weight of unfinished business settle in his chest. The morning stretched ahead of him filled with meetings and decisions, but all he could think about was the careful way Evelyn was avoiding his eyes. The marketing meeting dragged on longer than expected. Thomas found himself distracted, checking his phone and glancing toward the door. When Evelyn entered to quietly place a water glass beside his elbow, he felt an absurd sense of relief at her presence. "Thank you," he murmured. She nodded without meeting his eyes, and slipped back out of the room. After lunch, Thomas made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. He needed to talk to Evelyn properly, away from the careful formality of office interaction. When she knocked on his door at 3:30 to review his correspondence, he took a deep breath. "Could you sit down for a moment? I'd like to discuss last night." Evelyn remained standing, her hands clasped loosely in front of her. Is there a problem with my performance, Mr. Whitaker? No, of course not. You were perfect last night. That's not what I wanted to discuss. Then I'm not sure what we need to talk about. Her calm professionalism was starting to frustrate him. Evelyn, please, just sit down. She took the chair across from his desk, her posture straight and attentive, waiting. I want to apologize, Thomas began. Not for asking you to come with me. I don't regret that. But for not anticipating how difficult the evening might be for you. I told you I understood what I was walking into. Did you? Really? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her fingers smoothing an invisible wrinkle in her skirt. I knew it would be challenging. Julian was out of line, Clara too, and my mother. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. I should have handled it better. How? The question was direct, without accusation, but it hit him hard. How should he have handled it? Should he have confronted Julian's subtle condescension directly, called out Clara's polite cruelty, told his mother to mind her own business? I don't know, he admitted, but I should have done something. Like what? Made a scene? Embarrassed everyone involved? Maybe, if that's what it took. Evelyn studied his face with the careful attention she usually reserved for complex scheduling problems. Is that really what you think I needed? A public defender? I think you deserved better than what you got. From them. Or from you. The question hung in the air between them. Thomas felt exposed, as if she could see straight through all his careful explanations to the truth underneath. I don't know what you mean. I think you do. She was right, and they both knew it. Thomas had failed her last night, but not in the way he was pretending. He'd failed her by bringing her into that world, and then standing back like an observer, instead of making it clear she belonged there because he wanted her there. The evening meant something to me, he said finally. More than I expected it to. What kind of something? I enjoyed spending time with you, away from work, away from all this. He gestured around his office. I liked watching you talk to Mrs. Delaney. I liked the way you handled every difficult moment with grace and intelligence. I liked having you there with me. Evelyn's expression didn't change, but he saw something shift in her eyes. It was a professional arrangement. It started that way. And now? Thomas felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, looking down into something vast and uncertain. One step forward would change everything between them. One step back would return them to safe, familiar ground. Now I'm not sure what it was. Mr. Whitaker, Thomas, please, when we're talking like this, just call me Thomas. She was quiet for a long moment. Thomas, I think we should be careful about blurring lines that are better kept clear. Why? Because I work for you. Because there's an imbalance here that makes everything complicated. Because, she trailed off, looking away from him for the first time. Because what? Because I can't afford to misunderstand your intentions. The words were soft, but carried a weight that made Thomas's chest tighten. What do you think my intentions are? I think you're a good man who had an unexpectedly pleasant evening and is confusing gratitude with something else. The assessment stung because part of it might be true, but only part. And if you're wrong, then we're in dangerous territory. Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her face. Would dangerous territory necessarily be bad? It would be complicated. I can handle complicated. Can you? Evelyn met his eyes directly. Can you handle taking me to another event where people look at us the way they looked at us last night? Can you handle your mother's disapproval, your friends' assumptions? Can you handle people thinking you're either slumming it or I'm climbing the social ladder? Thomas felt heat rise in his face. That's not what? That's not how people will see it, because that's exactly how they'll see it. I don't care what people think. Don't you? Evelyn's voice was gentle but skeptical. You've spent your entire life in that world. You care what they think more than you want to admit. Thomas opened his mouth to deny it, then closed it again. She wasn't entirely wrong. He had spent his life navigating social expectations, maintaining his family's reputation, playing by rules he'd never questioned. Maybe I do care, he said finally, but I care more about this, about you. The words surprised him as much as they seemed to surprise her. Evelyn's composure cracked slightly, and he saw something vulnerable flicker across her face before she recovered. Thomas, I know it's complicated. I know there are challenges we'd have to face, but I also know that last night was the most honest, most comfortable I've felt at a social event in years. And it wasn't because of the charity or the venue or the cause. It was because you were there with me. Evelyn stood up abruptly, smoothing her skirt with hands that weren't quite steady. I think I need some time to process this conversation. Of course. Take all the time you need. And I think we should maintain professional boundaries while I do that. Thomas felt a stab of disappointment, but nodded. I understand. I'll finish preparing tomorrow's materials and then head home early if that's all right. Whatever you need. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the handle. Thomas? For what it's worth, I had a good time last night too. The best parts anyway. Then she was gone, leaving Thomas alone with the echo of her words and the uncomfortable realization that he'd just changed the fundamental nature of their relationship without knowing where it might lead. The next few days passed in a strange, careful dance. Evelyn maintained perfect professional behavior, efficient, courteous, and completely impersonal. Thomas tried to follow her lead, but found himself watching for small signs of her mood, analyzing every interaction for hidden meaning. Thursday morning brought an unexpected complication. Thomas was reviewing quarterly reports when Julian called. Lunch today? Julian's voice carried its usual casual confidence. I'm curious to hear how your evening with the mysterious Miss Brooks turned out. I'm busy today. Come on, Thomas. I'm buying. Julian, 1 o'clock at Morrison's. I won't take no for an answer. The line went dead before Thomas could protest further. He stared at the phone, feeling trapped. Julian had a way of turning simple conversations into interrogations, and Thomas wasn't sure he was ready to discuss Evelyn with anyone, especially not with someone who'd already shown subtle signs of disapproval. At 1 o'clock, Thomas found himself in Morrison's elegant dining room, watching Julian peruse the wine list with the concentration of a scholar. The 98 Bordeaux, I think, Julian told the sommelier. We're celebrating. What are we celebrating? Your newfound interest in social experimentation. Julian's smile was sharp around the edges. Last Saturday was quite the departure from your usual type. Evelyn isn't an experiment. No? Then what is she? Thomas felt his jaw tighten. She's someone I enjoy spending time with. I'm sure you do. She's lovely in her way. Very earnest. The way Julian said earnest made it sound like a character flaw. She's intelligent, kind, and genuine. Qualities that seem to be in short supply in our usual social circle. Ah, Julian leaned back as their wine arrived. Having a crisis of faith about our terrible, shallow world? Not a crisis, just an observation. Thomas, we've been friends since prep school. I know when you're going through one of your reformist phases. This isn't a phase, isn't it? Julian tasted the wine and nodded approval to the sommelier. Remember sophomore year at Harvard when you decided to date that girl from the public university? What was her name? Rachel? You were going to show everyone that love transcended social boundaries. This is different. How? Thomas struggled to find words that would explain the difference without revealing too much. Rachel was, we were kids. This is different. Because you're older? Because Miss Brooks is more suitable? Because I care about her. The words came out stronger than Thomas had intended. Julian raised an eyebrow. Care about her how? I'm not sure yet. Thomas? Julian's voice took on the tone he used when dispensing advice to younger associates. You're a smart man. Surely you can see the complications here. Such as? Where do I start? She works for you, which creates all sorts of power dynamic issues. She's from a completely different background, which your mother will never accept. And frankly, no matter how charming she doesn't have the social connections that someone in your position needs. Thomas felt anger building in his chest. Social connections? You know what I mean. A wife, if that's where this is heading, is a business partner as much as a romantic one. She opens doors, creates opportunities, strengthens family alliances. Can Miss Brooks do that? Maybe I don't need those kinds of opportunities. Julian laughed. You say that now, but you've never operated without them. Your entire career has been built on relationships that started at charity balls and country club dinners. There are other ways to build a career. Of course there are. But are you really ready to give up everything you've worked for? Everything your family has built? Thomas stared into his wine glass, seeing his reflection fractured in the burgundy liquid. It wouldn't necessarily come to that, wouldn't it? How do you think people will react when Thomas Whitaker starts bringing his assistant to social events? How do you think your clients will interpret that choice? How do you think your mother will handle introducing Evelyn as her daughter-in-law? The word daughter-in-law hit Thomas like a physical blow. Were his feelings really that serious? Was he thinking that far ahead? "You're getting ahead of yourself," Thomas said. "We've had dinner together once. And you're already defending her against criticism she hasn't even received yet. That tells me everything I need to know about where your head is." Julian leaned forward, his expression growing serious. "I'm not trying to be cruel, Thomas. I like Miss Brooks. She seems like a good person. But good people can still be wrong for each other. And sometimes the kindest thing you can do is recognize that before anyone gets hurt." Thomas felt the weight of Julian's words settling over him like a heavy coat. Everything his friend said made logical sense. The complications were real, the challenges significant. His mother would struggle with acceptance. His social circle would be confused and possibly judgmental. Business relationships might become awkward, but logic seemed less important when he thought about the way Evelyn had smiled at Mrs. Delaney, or the grace with which she'd handled Clara's subtle cruelty, or the vulnerability he'd glimpsed in her eyes during their conversation in his office. "I hear what you're saying," Thomas said finally, "but I'm not ready to walk away from this based on potential problems." "Then be careful, for both your sakes." Julian raised his glass in a toast. "To making wise choices." Thomas clinked glasses with his oldest friend, but the wine tasted bitter in his mouth. That evening, Thomas stayed late at the office, ostensibly to catch up on paperwork, but really to think. The building was quiet except for the distant sound of cleaning crews and the occasional hum of the elevator. Around 8 o'clock, he heard footsteps in the hallway. He looked up to see Evelyn in the doorway, wearing jeans and a soft blue sweater that made her look younger and more relaxed than he'd seen her in days. "I forgot my phone," she explained, moving toward her desk. "I was meeting my sister for dinner and realized I'd left it in my drawer." "How was dinner?" "Good. Maya's been accepted to graduate school. We were celebrating." "That's wonderful. What's she studying?" "Social work. She wants to work with families in crisis." Evelyn found her phone and slipped it into her purse. She's always been the one with the clear sense of purpose. Unlike me, I suppose. I sort of fell into this job by accident." Thomas felt curious about this glimpse into her personal life. "How so?" Evelyn hesitated, as if debating whether to continue the conversation. "I was working at a temp agency, trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Your previous assistant quit suddenly, and they sent me over for what was supposed to be a 2-week assignment." "That was 2 years ago." 2 years and 3 months, she smiled slightly. "I kept thinking I'd figure out my next step, but this job was comfortable. Good pay, interesting work, reasonable hours. But not your passion. I don't know what my passion is. That's the problem." They stood in the quiet office, the city lights creating patterns on the floor between them. Thomas felt the careful distance of the past few days beginning to dissolve. "Maybe that's not a problem," he said. "Maybe it's just where you are right now." "Easy for you to say. You've always known exactly what you wanted." "Have I?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Haven't you? Take over the family business, build wealth, maintain the social position you were born into? That's what was expected of me. It's not the same thing as wanting it." "What do you want?" The question was simple and completely devastating. Thomas realized he'd been so busy meeting expectations and fulfilling obligations that he'd rarely stopped to consider his own desires. "I'm starting to figure that out," he said finally. Evelyn studied his face in the dim office lighting. "And what have you figured out so far?" "That I want to spend more time with you. That I want to know what makes you laugh, what you think about when you're alone, what your dreams are beyond figuring out your next career step." "Thomas, I know it's complicated. I know there are challenges we'd have to navigate. But I also know that I've been thinking about you constantly since Saturday night, and not just as my assistant." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. What are you asking me? I'm asking if you'd be willing to have dinner with me. Not as a professional obligation, not as a favor to help me through a social event. Just dinner. You and me getting to know each other better. That would change everything between us. Maybe. Would that necessarily be bad? She looked around the office, at her desk, at the files and folders that represented 2 years of professional relationship, at all the careful boundaries they'd maintained. I don't know, she said finally. Then let's find out. One dinner. If it's awkward or complicated or just doesn't work, we'll go back to the way things were. Can we? Go back, I mean? Thomas considered the question seriously. Honestly? I don't think we can go back regardless. Something has already changed between us. The question is whether we explore that change or spend our time pretending it didn't happen. Evelyn was quiet again, her fingers playing with the strap of her purse. Thomas held his breath, waiting. One dinner, she said finally. One dinner. Not somewhere we might run into your mother or Julian or anyone from that world. Agreed. And if it doesn't work out, it will. She looked at him with something that might have been hope mixed with wariness. How can you be so sure? Because I've been imagining what it would be like to have dinner with you for 4 days now, and every imagined version has been better than any real dinner I've had in months. A small smile played at the corners of her mouth. That's either very romantic or very sad commentary on your social life. Probably both, she laughed, and the sound filled the quiet office with warmth. All right, Thomas Whitaker, one dinner, but you're choosing the restaurant, and I'm warning you now. I have strong opinions about overpriced food and pretentious wine lists. Noted. How about Saturday night? Saturday night. As they rode down in the elevator together, Thomas felt lighter than he had in days. Whatever complications lay ahead, whatever challenges they'd have to face, at least they would face them honestly. For now, that felt like enough. Saturday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made the city feel alive with possibility. Thomas spent the morning second-guessing his restaurant choice, changing his shirt 3 times and generally behaving like a nervous teenager preparing for his first date, which, in many ways, this was. He'd chosen a small Italian place in the Arts District, warm, unpretentious, with excellent food and no chance of running into anyone from his usual social circle. The kind of place he'd never been to but had always wanted to try. At 7 o'clock, Thomas stood outside Bella Vista, checking his watch and fighting the urge to pace. He'd arrived 15 minutes early, too anxious to wait at home any longer. The restaurant's windows glowed with soft light, and he could hear the gentle murmur of conversation and clinking silverware from inside. You look nervous. Thomas turned to find Evelyn approaching with a smile that made his heart skip. She wore a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her eyes, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and relaxed, and completely at ease in a way that made him feel both grateful and slightly envious. I am nervous, he admitted. Is that pathetic? It's honest. She studied his face. Why are you nervous? Because this matters to me, because I want it to go well, because I've been thinking about tonight all week. And what have you been thinking? Thomas felt heat rise in his cheeks. That I have no idea how to do this. Do what? Date someone I actually care about. The admission surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. Evelyn's expression softened. Well, she said gently, I've never dated my boss, so we're both in uncharted territory. Ex-boss, Thomas corrected. As of 5 o'clock yesterday, you no longer work for me. Evelyn blinked. I'm sorry, what? I spoke with HR yesterday afternoon. You've been transferred to the marketing department, effective Monday. Same salary, same benefits, but you'll be reporting to Jennifer Walsh instead of me. Thomas, you can't just... I can, and I did. I know it's presumptuous, but I needed to remove the power imbalance before we could explore this properly. Evelyn stared at him, emotions flickering across her face too quickly for him to read. What if I don't want to work in marketing? What if I was happy where I was? Thomas felt his stomach drop. I didn't think about that. I was so focused on solving the professional conflict that I didn't consider whether you wanted it solved. You made a major decision about my career without consulting me. Yes. Thomas ran a hand through his hair. That was wrong of me. I can reverse it if you want. I just thought, what did you think? I thought it would give us a chance to see where this goes without the complication of working together. But I should have asked you first." Evelyn was quiet for a moment, looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "What's my new job description?" "Marketing coordinator. You'd be helping develop client presentations, coordinating campaigns, working directly with the creative team. Jennifer says it's a role with real growth potential." "And you discussed this with Jennifer without mentioning why you were making the transfer?" "I told her you were interested in expanding your skills, which isn't entirely untrue, is it? You've always been excellent at the creative aspects of my work." Evelyn considered this. "So you basically got me a promotion to clear your conscience about asking me to dinner." "That's a very unflattering but probably accurate way to put it." She shook her head, but he caught the hint of a smile she was trying to suppress. "Thomas Whitaker, you are either the most thoughtful man I've ever met or the most manipulative." "I was hoping for thoughtful." "The jury's still out." Thomas felt a rush of relief. "Does this mean you're willing to have dinner with me?" "I'm willing to have dinner with you because I want to, not because you rearranged my entire career. But we're going to talk about this decision-making pattern of yours." "Fair enough." They were seated at a corner table with a view of the bustling kitchen where chefs moved with practiced efficiency around gleaming stoves and prep stations. The restaurant was exactly what Thomas had hoped, intimate without being pretentious, busy enough to feel alive but quiet enough for real conversation. "This is nice," Evelyn said, looking around appreciatively. "How did you find it?" "Online research. I've spent my entire adult life eating at the same 5 restaurants. I figured it was time to branch out." "And what made you choose this one?" Thomas felt slightly embarrassed by the honest answer. The reviews mentioned that it felt like eating in someone's home. That sounded appealing. As opposed to eating in places designed to impress people rather than feed them. Evelyn smiled. "You really are having a crisis of faith about your world, aren't you?" "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just starting to see it clearly for the first time." The waiter brought menus and a basket of warm bread that smelled like heaven. Thomas watched Evelyn scan the options, noting the way her face lit up when she read certain descriptions. "Everything looks amazing," she said. "What are you thinking?" "I was actually hoping you'd help me choose. I tend to order the same thing everywhere, something safe, something I know I'll like." "That's a terrible way to experience food." "It's a terrible way to experience a lot of things." Evelyn looked up from her menu, meeting his eyes directly. "What changed? You've been living this way for 30 years. Why question it now?" Thomas considered the question while breaking off a piece of bread. "I think it started before I realized it. Small moments of feeling disconnected from my own life. But Saturday night crystallized something." "What specifically?" "Watching you navigate that entire evening with such grace and authenticity. You were completely yourself, even in a room full of people who were performing their social roles. It made me realize I'd been performing for so long that I wasn't sure who I really was underneath it all." "And you think I can help you figure that out?" "I think spending time with you makes me want to figure it out." The waiter returned, and Evelyn took charge of ordering. The special pasta for herself, the osso buco for Thomas, and a bottle of wine she chose after a brief but knowledgeable conversation with their server about regional Italian varietals. "Where did you learn about wine?" Thomas asked after the waiter left. "My dad. He worked at a restaurant when I was growing up. He used to bring home stories about the interesting wines they served, and eventually I got curious enough to start reading about it." "What does your father do now?" "He's retired. He and my mom live in Florida now. They bought a little house near the beach and spend their days gardening and arguing about the best way to make coffee." Thomas smiled. "They sound happy." "They are. 43 years of marriage and they still hold hands while they watch TV." "That's remarkable." "Is it? It seems pretty normal to me." The comment made Thomas realize how different their perspectives were. In his world, marriages were often strategic alliances that lasted decades through careful management and separate interests. The idea of holding hands after 43 years seemed both foreign and deeply appealing. "My parents were married for 35 years before my father died," Thomas said. "They were compatible, respectful. I'm not sure they were ever deeply in love." "That sounds lonely." "I think it was for both of them, but they were committed to making it work." "Is that what you want?" compatibility and respect? Thomas considered the question. I used to think it was enough. Now I'm not sure. What changed your mind? You, partly. Watching you with Mrs. Delaney last weekend, seeing how genuinely you connected with her, and then seeing how you handled Julian and Clara, you stayed true to yourself even when it would have been easier to change yourself to fit in. I couldn't change myself to fit in even if I wanted to. I don't have the right background, the right education, the right connections. You have something better, which is authenticity, kindness, the ability to see people clearly and still choose to believe the best about them. Evelyn looked down at her hands. You're giving me too much credit. Am I? You've worked for me for 2 years. You've seen me at my most demanding, most unreasonable, most stressed, but you've never once been anything less than professional and kind. That's my job. No, that's who you are. Your job was to manage my schedule and handle my correspondence. Everything else, the way you remember how I like my coffee on Monday mornings, the way you diffuse tense situations with clients, the way you somehow make everyone around you feel heard and valued, that's just you. Their wine arrived, and Evelyn took a careful sip before responding. You know what I think? What? I think you've been surrounded by people who perform kindness when it serves their purposes. So when you encounter someone who's genuinely kind, it seems extraordinary. Maybe. But does it matter why it seems extraordinary if it actually is? Evelyn smiled. That's either very wise or very naive. I'm hoping for wise. Their food arrived, steaming. Plates of pasta and tender meat that looked as good as it smelled. For a few minutes, they ate in companionable silence, both too hungry to maintain conversation. This is incredible, Thomas said finally. Better than your usual restaurants? So much better. I can't believe I've been missing places like this. There's a whole world of experiences you've been missing. Not just restaurants, everything. Art galleries that aren't on the social circuit, music venues that aren't charity events, parks where you can walk without worrying about who might see you. Show me. The words came out before Thomas fully realized he was going to say them. Evelyn looked up from her pasta. Show you what? All of it. The places you go, the things you do when you're not working. I want to see the city through your eyes. Thomas, you can't just decide to live a completely different life because you're attracted to someone new. Why not? Because attraction fades. Because novelty wears off. Because you might wake up in 6 months and realize you've given up everything familiar for someone you barely know. Thomas set down his fork. Is that what you think this is? Attraction to novelty? I think it might be part of it. And what if it's not? Evelyn was quiet for a moment, considering. Then I think you're taking a very big risk. Are you worth it? The question hung between them, direct and vulnerable. Evelyn met his eyes. I don't know. Are you? The honesty of the response hit Thomas like a physical blow. She wasn't going to make this easy for him, wasn't going to flatter his ego or downplay the significance of what he was asking. I'm hoping we can find out together. After dinner, they walked through the Arts District's quiet streets, past galleries and small theaters and coffee shops that stayed open late for the creative crowd. Thomas had driven through this neighborhood countless times, but had never stopped to explore it. There, Evelyn said, pointing to a small gallery with warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. This place always has interesting local artists. They peered through the window at abstract paintings in bold, emotional colors that were nothing like the careful landscapes and portraits that hung in Thomas's world. Do you like them? He asked. Some of them. Art doesn't have to be pretty to be meaningful. I'm not sure I understand the difference. Pretty art makes you feel comfortable. Meaningful art makes you feel something, even if that something is uncomfortable. Thomas studied the paintings with new eyes, trying to see beyond their immediate visual impact to whatever emotion they were trying to convey. That one, he said, pointing to a swirling composition in blues and grays. It feels like loneliness. Yes, but also hope, maybe? See how the blue gets lighter toward the center? Thomas looked closer and saw what she meant. The painting was sad but not despairing, isolated but not hopeless. I've never looked at art that way before. How do you usually look at it? as decoration or investment, something that looks appropriate in the right space. That's a shame. Art is supposed to be a conversation. They continued walking, and Thomas found himself seeing the neighborhood differently. The graffiti on a brick wall wasn't vandalism, but expression. The small restaurant with mismatched chairs wasn't unprofessional, but welcoming. The group of young people laughing outside a bar weren't being disruptive, but enjoying life. "You're quiet," Evelyn observed as they reached her apartment building. "I'm processing." "Good processing or overwhelming processing?" Thomas smiled. "Good processing, challenging processing." They stood outside her building's entrance, neither quite ready to end the evening. The streetlights created pools of warm light along the sidewalk, and Thomas could hear the distant sound of music from a nearby club. "I had a wonderful time tonight," he said. "So did I." "Can we do it again?" Evelyn studied his face in the streetlight. "Are you sure this is what you want? Not just tonight, but everything that comes with it." "I'm sure I want to find out." "That's not the same thing." "No, it's not, but it's honest." She nodded slowly. "I can work with honest." "Does that mean yes?" "It means I'm willing to take this one step at a time and see where it leads." Thomas felt a rush of gratitude and relief. "That's all I'm asking for." "No, it's not." Evelyn's voice was gentle but clear. "You're asking for much more than that, and we both know it. But one step at a time is how I need to approach this." "Because of the risk?" "Because of the stakes. For both of us." Thomas wanted to ask what she meant, but something in her expression told him this wasn't the moment for that conversation. Instead, he stepped closer and took her hand. "Thank you for tonight, for the dinner, for the walk, for helping me see things differently. Thank you for asking me, and for transferring me to marketing, even though you should have consulted me first. I promise to make better decisions about that kind of thing in the future. I'm going to hold you to that." They stood there for another moment, hands linked, both aware that something significant had begun between them. Thomas wanted to kiss her, wanted to pull her closer and make the evening last longer, but he could sense that Evelyn needed to set the pace. "Good night, Evelyn." "Good night, Thomas." He waited until she was safely inside, before walking back to his car, feeling like the city itself had changed around him. The same buildings, the same streets, but everything looked different when viewed through the lens of possibility. As he drove home through the quiet Saturday night streets, Thomas found himself thinking about the painting in the gallery, the one that moved from dark blue to light, from isolation to hope. Tonight felt like the beginning of that transition, and for the first time in years, he was genuinely excited about what tomorrow might bring. The following weeks passed like scenes from a life Thomas had never imagined living. Instead of his usual routine of work, gym, and solitary dinners, his evenings became adventures guided by Evelyn's curiosity and warmth. She introduced him to a bookstore cafe where poets read their work on Tuesday nights, their voices raw with emotion as they shared stories about love and loss and dreams deferred. Thomas sat in the back, nursing coffee that was stronger and more bitter than anything he'd ever tasted, watching Evelyn's face as she listened with the same focused attention she'd once given his business calls. "What did you think?" she asked as they walked home afterward. "I think I understood maybe half of it," Thomas admitted. "But the half I understood made me feel something I don't have words for." That's the point. Poetry isn't supposed to be completely understood. It's supposed to be felt. Like the art in the gallery. Exactly like that. On Friday nights, they discovered a small jazz club where musicians played not for fame or fortune, but for the pure joy of making music together. Thomas watched Evelyn sway slightly to the rhythm, her eyes closed, completely present in the moment. He found himself studying her face more than listening to the music, amazed by her ability to lose herself in experiences he would have dismissed as background noise just weeks earlier. "You're not listening," she said without opening her eyes. "I'm listening to you listen." "That's cheating." "Maybe, but it's more interesting than the music." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was part amusement, part exasperation. "Thomas, you can't experience life secondhand. You have to participate." "I am participating." "No, you're observing. There's a difference." The comment stung because it was true. Thomas had spent so much of his life watching from a careful distance that full engagement felt foreign and slightly dangerous. "Show me how," he said. Evelyn reached for his hand. "Close your eyes. Here? Here." Thomas glanced around the dimly lit club, acutely aware of the other patrons who might be watching. Then he looked at Evelyn's patient, encouraging face, and made a choice. He closed his eyes. "Now just listen. Don't analyze, don't think about whether you like it or understand it. Just let the music exist around you." Thomas tried to follow her guidance, but his mind kept wandering to practical concerns. What if someone he knew walked in? What if he looked foolish sitting there with his eyes closed? What if— "You're thinking too loud," Evelyn whispered. "How can you tell? Your shoulders are tense and you keep frowning." Thomas forced himself to relax, to stop managing the experience and simply have it. Gradually, the music began to penetrate his awareness in a different way. The piano's melody became a conversation with the bass, and the drums provided a heartbeat that seemed to sync with his own pulse. When the song ended, Thomas opened his eyes to find Evelyn watching him with a soft smile. "Better?" "Better," he agreed, surprised to find it was true. Their relationship developed its own rhythm during these weeks. Dinners at small restaurants where they talked until closing time. Long walks through neighborhoods Thomas had never explored. Quiet evenings at Evelyn's apartment where she cooked simple meals that somehow tasted better than anything he'd eaten at five-star establishments. Her apartment was nothing like his penthouse. Small, comfortable, filled with books and plants and photographs that told the story of a life lived with intention. Thomas loved the way late afternoon light filtered through her kitchen window, the way her cat, Duchess, claimed his lap whenever he sat on the couch, the way Evelyn hummed while she cooked. "You're different here," Evelyn observed one evening as they cleaned dishes together. "Different how?" "Relaxed, like you're not performing for an invisible audience." Thomas considered this as he dried a plate. "I think I've been performing for so long that I forgot there was an alternative." "What were you performing?" "Success, I suppose. Competence. The idea that I had everything under control." "And now?" "Now I'm not sure control is as important as I thought it was." Evelyn smiled. "That's either growth or a midlife crisis." "Hopefully growth." "At 30? You're a little young for a midlife crisis." "Maybe I'm an overachiever." She laughed, and the sound filled her small kitchen with warmth. Thomas realized he'd never heard her laugh with such complete abandon when they worked together. Their professional relationship had been pleasant, but careful, with boundaries neither of them had fully recognized until they began to cross them. "Evelyn? Yes? Are you happy? With this, I mean. With us?" She was quiet for a moment, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm happy," she said finally. "But I'm also scared." "Of what?" "Of how easy this feels. Of how much I look forward to seeing you. Of how quickly I'm getting used to having you in my life." Thomas set down the dish towel and turned to face her fully. "Those sound like good things." "They are good things. That's what scares me." "I don't understand." Evelyn leaned against the counter, her expression thoughtful. "Thomas, you're used to getting what you want. You've lived your entire life with the assumption that if you work hard enough, if you're smart enough, if you have enough resources, you can control outcomes. And relationships don't work that way. You can't manage your way to love, and you can't guarantee that caring about someone will protect you from being hurt." The words hit Thomas with unexpected force. "Are you worried I'm going to hurt you?" "I'm worried we're going to hurt each other. Not intentionally, but because we come from such different worlds. Because the things that matter to you might not matter to me, and vice versa. Because your family and friends might never accept me, and my family might never understand you." Thomas felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Have you been thinking about this a lot?" "Every day." "And what have you concluded?" "That I care about you enough to take the risk anyway. But I need you to understand what you're risking, too." "Tell me." Evelyn moved closer, her expression serious. "You're risking your mother's approval, your social position, your friends' respect, the easy navigation of a world you were born into. You're risking comfort and certainty for something that might not work out. Those things seem less important than they used to. Now they do. But what about when we have our first real fight? What about when you're invited to an event where I don't fit in? What about when your mother makes it clear she'll never accept me as part of the family? Thomas reached for her hands. And we'll figure it out. You can't know that. You're right, I can't. But I can know that I want to try. Evelyn searched his face. Even knowing what it might cost you, even knowing that, she was quiet for a long moment. Okay, okay, I believe you. For now. They held each other in her small kitchen as the sun set outside her window, both aware that they were choosing something uncertain and potentially difficult over the safety of their separate, predictable lives. Later that week, Thomas was reviewing marketing reports in his office when his mother called. "I'm having lunch at the club tomorrow." Margaret's voice carried its usual calm authority. "I'd like you to join me." "What's the occasion?" "Do I need an occasion to have lunch with my son?" Thomas knew his mother well enough to recognize the careful neutrality in her tone. She wanted something, or she'd heard something, or both. "Of course not. What time?" "Noon. And Thomas, come alone." The line went dead before he could ask what she meant, though he suspected he already knew. The next day, Thomas found his mother waiting at their usual table in the Riverside Country Club's dining room. She wore a pale blue suit that perfectly matched her eyes, her silver hair styled in the elegant updo she'd favored for as long as he could remember. At 58, Margaret Whittaker was still a formidable presence, respected and slightly feared by the city's social elite. "You look tired," she said as he kissed her cheek. "Thank you. You look lovely as always." "Don't deflect with flattery. It's beneath you." They ordered their usual meals, salmon for her, club sandwich for him, and made polite conversation about business and mutual acquaintances until the food arrived. Then, Margaret set down her fork and fixed him with the direct gaze that had terrified his childhood. "I've been hearing interesting things about you lately." "Such as?" "Clara Hayes mentioned seeing you at Bella Vista last weekend, with your former assistant." Thomas felt his jaw tighten. "It's a free country." "Don't be glib. Clara also mentioned that you seemed quite attentive to Miss Brooks." "Her name is Evelyn." "I know her name, Thomas. I'm more interested in understanding your intentions toward her." Thomas set down his sandwich, his appetite suddenly gone. "My intentions are to spend time with someone I care about." "And what does care about mean in this context?" "It means I enjoy her company. It means I'm exploring the possibility of a relationship with her." Margaret was quiet for a moment, her expression carefully controlled. "I see. Do you?" "I see a young man who's allowing infatuation to cloud his judgment." "That's not—" "Thomas, please, let me finish." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Miss Brooks seems like a lovely person, intelligent, well-mannered, perfectly appropriate in her role as your employee. But there's a significant difference between appreciating someone professionally and pursuing them romantically." "Such as?" "Such as the implications for your future, such as the challenges you'd face as a couple, such as the impact on our family's reputation." Thomas felt anger building in his chest. "Is that really what matters to you? Reputation? It's what should matter to you. Thomas, you have responsibilities to the business, to the family name, to the social connections that have supported our success for generations. And I can't fulfill those responsibilities if I'm with Evelyn?" Margaret sighed. "I'm not saying Miss Brooks isn't a good person. I'm saying she's not the right person for someone in your position." "Because she's black?" The words hung in the air between them, stark and uncompromising. Margaret's face flushed slightly. "That's unfair and untrue. This has nothing to do with race." "Doesn't it? It has to do with compatibility, with shared backgrounds and values, with the practical realities of moving through our social world." "Maybe I don't want to move through our social world anymore." Margaret stared at him as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. "What does that mean?" "It means I've been questioning a lot of assumptions lately. About what success looks like, about what makes life meaningful, about whether the approval of people like Julian and Clara is worth pursuing. Those people are your peers, Thomas. They're your natural community. Are they? Because when I spend time with Evelyn, I feel more like myself than I have in years. When I'm with your natural community, I feel like I'm playing a role in someone else's story." Margaret leaned back in her chair, studying his face with new concern. How long has this been going on? The questioning? Longer than I realized. But spending time with Evelyn has clarified things. Thomas, I'm worried you're making a mistake that will have consequences you can't foresee. Maybe. But I'm more worried about making the mistake of choosing safety over happiness. His mother was quiet for a long moment, her lunch forgotten as she processed his words. What do you want from me? She asked finally. I want you to meet her properly, really meet her, not as my employee, but as someone important to me. I want you to give her a chance. And if I can't accept her? The question was soft but loaded with implications. Thomas felt the weight of it settle over him like a heavy blanket. Then we'll have to figure out how to navigate that. Thomas, Mother, I love you, I respect you, but I won't sacrifice my chance at happiness to maintain an image that doesn't even feel authentic anymore. Margaret's composure cracked slightly, and Thomas saw something vulnerable flicker across her face. I just want you to be happy, darling. Truly happy. I know, and I am happy. Happier than I've been in years. Are you sure it's not just the novelty, the excitement of something new and different? I'm not sure of anything except that I want to find out. They sat in silence for a moment, the elegant dining room buzzing with conversation around them. Thomas watched his mother struggle with something that looked like grief. She must be quite special, Margaret said finally. She is. Will you bring her to dinner sometime, so I can see for myself what's captured my son's heart? Thomas felt a rush of gratitude and relief. You'd do that? I'd do that. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. I reserve the right to maintain my concerns. Fair enough. As they finished lunch, Thomas felt something shift between them, not resolution exactly, but the beginning of understanding. His mother might never fully embrace his choices, but she was willing to try. For now, that felt like enough. That evening, Thomas called Evelyn from his apartment. How did your lunch go? She asked without preamble. How did you know I was calling about lunch? Because you have that careful, post-difficult conversation tone in your voice. Thomas smiled, amazed as always by her ability to read him. She wants to meet you properly, have dinner with us sometime. And how do you feel about that? Terrified, Thomas admitted, but hopeful. What should I expect? My mother at her most charming and most evaluative. She'll be perfectly polite while examining every word you say for signs of character. Wonderful, no pressure at all. Evelyn, you don't have to do this if you're not ready. I'm not ready, but I think it's important anyway. Why? Because if this is going to work, if we're going to work, then I need to understand the world you come from, and your mother needs to understand that I'm not going anywhere. The quiet determination in her voice made Thomas's chest tighten with something that might have been love. Are you sure? I'm sure I want to try. As they made plans for the dinner that would either bring them closer together or reveal cracks they couldn't bridge, Thomas found himself thinking about the jazz club, about closing his eyes and learning to experience something without controlling it. Some risks, he was beginning to understand, were worth taking precisely because the outcome couldn't be guaranteed.